The restaurant was loud, packed. Nobody was paying attention to the little girl in the wheelchair. Nobody except the dog. The Belgian Malinois lifted his head from beneath the table, ears pinned forward, a low vibration building in his chest that wasn't quite a growl yet. Something older than instinct, something trained by war. His handler, a retired Navy SEAL with a jaw like quarried stone, followed the dog's gaze across the dining room and saw her, 8 years old, leg brace visible beneath the hem of her dress, knuckles white on the wheelchair rims. 2 men in clean suits stood behind her like statues. Then a crumpled napkin rolled across the polished floor and stopped against the dog's paw. Purple crayon. Shaky letters. Help. If you've never subscribed to this channel, do it right now, because this is the kind of story that doesn't let you go. Hit that like button, drop your city and country in the comments so I can see how far this story travels, and stay with me until the very last word. You will not want to miss what happens next. The Friday night crowd at Harlow's Bistro was the kind that required reservations 2 weeks out. Candlelight, exposed brick, a jazz quartet doing something quiet and competent in the corner. The kind of place where people brought clients they wanted to impress, and spouses they were trying to remember they still loved. Ethan Cross had not chosen it for the ambiance. He'd chosen it because his daughter had a birthday, and she'd asked for the place with the fancy breadbasket, and Ethan Cross had spent 17 years in environments where men died in the mud, and so he had developed a personal policy. When his daughter asked for something reasonable, he said yes without condition. She was already at the table when he arrived, 19 years old and somehow still wearing the same expression she'd had at 6, that particular brand of patient exasperation that only daughters aimed at their fathers. Her name was Mara, and she had her mother's cheekbones and her mother's habit of arriving exactly on time to highlight that Ethan was always exactly 4 minutes late. "You look tired," she said. "I am tired." "You said you were sleeping better." "I said a lot of things." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, and Rex settled beneath the table with the practiced efficiency of a dog who had done this 10,000 times. "How's the internship?" "We're not talking about the internship. We're celebrating. Order something expensive." Rex was a Belgian Malinois, 9 years old, which was senior for a working dog. He'd spent 6 of those years in the military, 3 deployments, 2 combat tours, and 1 night in Kandahar that neither he nor Ethan discussed with anyone, before a fragment of shrapnel ended his operational career. The fragment had been removed. The alertness hadn't. Rex still worked because Rex didn't know how not to, and because the VA therapist had told Ethan that mutual purpose was therapeutic, and because the two of them had simply never figured out how to exist in separate rooms. The dog was well-mannered in public. He didn't beg. He didn't pace. He lay beneath the table with his chin on his forepaws and watched the room with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who'd been paid in a previous life to notice everything. He'd been lying still for about 11 minutes when he stopped. Ethan felt it before he registered it. A change in the quality of the air beneath the table, a subtle shift in Rex's weight. The dog hadn't moved, but his breathing changed and the muscles along his shoulders went from loose to coiled without a sound. Ethan's hand found the edge of the table. "Dad?" "Hold on." He didn't move his head. He'd learned a long time ago that turning toward a threat announced your awareness of it, and announcing your awareness was a tactical gift you didn't hand to strangers in restaurants. Instead, he let his gaze travel sideways, soft-focused, the way a sniper scanned. The wheelchair was near the far wall. The girl in it was small, 8, maybe 9. She had a leg brace on her right side, bright blue, the kind with the Velcro straps that pediatric orthopedic offices bought in colors to make them seem cheerful. Her dress was neat, her hair had been combed. She looked from a distance like a child whose family had taken her somewhere nice. 2 men stood behind the wheelchair, both in their 40s, both in suits that were good without being remarkable, the specific anonymity of men who dressed to be forgettable. One stood with his weight on his right foot, his left slightly back, keeping the chair in his peripheral vision without appearing to watch it. The other had his phone out and was doing something on it with the casual posture of a man pretending to check email who was in fact watching the room. Between them and the girl sat a woman, 30s maybe, dark circles beneath her eyes that no amount of foundation had covered. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her, not holding her menu, not reaching for her water glass. Just flat, like she was bracing against something invisible. The girl glanced toward Ethan's table. Their eyes didn't meet. Not quite. But she saw him, and whatever she saw made her look away quickly, and then something happened that made Ethan's stomach go cold. She looked back, deliberately. The second look was not the accidental glance of a bored child. It was a child who had decided something. "Mara," he said quietly, "don't turn around. Just keep looking at me and tell me if anyone comes toward our table from your left." "Dad, it's my birthday dinner." "Mara." She knew that voice. She'd heard it exactly 4 times in her life, and 3 of those times something had happened afterward that she'd had to process later with a therapist. She set down her menu. "Okay," she said. Rex's low vibration was still building. Not a growl yet, not anything a civilian would categorize as alarming, but Ethan knew the difference between Rex settling and Rex preparing. The dog's nose had moved slightly toward the far wall. His ears, which normally rested in a loose half-forward position, were now pinned directly forward, rotating almost imperceptibly like satellite dishes locking onto a signal. The crumpled napkin arrived approximately 90 seconds later. It had been pushed, or dropped, or released, Ethan couldn't tell which, and it rolled across a gap between tables, catching on a chair leg, tumbling free, and coming to rest directly against Rex's left forepaw. The dog didn't react to it. He just held position. Ethan reached down casually, like a man retrieving something he'd dropped, and picked it up. He unfolded it beneath the table. "Help." Purple crayon. The H was larger than the other letters, drawn first with the force of urgency. The E and the L were smaller, shakier. The P had a slight smear at the bottom, like the hand had been pulled away before the stroke finished. Ethan set the napkin on his knee. He breathed in. He breathed out. His heart rate had not changed. 17 years had rewired whatever biological response normal people had to adrenaline. Instead of acceleration, he felt a kind of narrowing, like the world was sharpening itself down to what mattered. It was not a feeling he could explain to anyone who hadn't experienced it. It was simply what happened when the situation required him to be effective rather than reactive. He looked at Mara. "I need you to go to the restroom," he said. "Take your phone, call 911 from inside. Tell them you have a suspected child endangerment situation at Harlow's Bistro on 5th. Tell them you need plain clothes or unmarked, not a patrol car rolling up with lights, because that creates a foot pursuit situation. Can you do that?" Mara had gone still in the way that Ethan recognized as competence organizing itself. She'd grown up with him. She knew the difference between his paranoia and his operational voice. "Yes," she said. "Don't come back out until I text you." She picked up her purse with the unhurried motion of a woman going to reapply her lipstick, and she left. Ethan had not yet looked directly at the girl. He used the next 2 minutes to map the room. 17 tables, 31 diners visible, plus waitstaff. He counted 4 servers, 1 manager in a dark vest, 1 busboy who was moving clockwise around the tables in a pattern that would bring him past the far wall in approximately 4 minutes. The jazz quartet occupied a raised platform near the rear entrance. The main entrance was to his left. The kitchen was through a door to the rear right. The man with the phone stepped outside. Rex's head turned 3 degrees toward the door. Ethan waited, counted. At 45 seconds, he repositioned slightly in his chair, and through the restaurant's front window he could see the man standing on the sidewalk, shoulder turned away from the street, phone to his ear. The man's lips were moving. His body language was not the loose, slightly bored posture of someone checking in with their wife. It was tighter, purposeful. His free hand rose and made a small gesture, 2 fingers, and then he turned and looked back through the window. Ethan was already looking elsewhere. He recognized what he'd just seen. 2 fingers. It meant something. He didn't know if it meant 2 minutes, or 2 vehicles, or 2 additional people, but it meant something was coordinated, and that meant the men behind the wheelchair were not opportunists. These were professionals. The man came back inside. "Told you the traffic's fine from the East End," he was saying into the phone, though his eyes swept the room as he walked. A practice gesture. A performance. "We'll be out in 15 minutes. Ethan processed that. He looked at the girl. She was looking at him. Her face was the kind of carefully composed that children achieve when they have learned, through experience rather than instruction, that expressing fear draws attention. She was holding herself very still, but her eyes, dark brown, slightly too large for her face, framed by lashes that were still a little wet. Her eyes were asking him something that she couldn't put words to. He gave her the smallest possible nod. Her chest rose and fell. The man who'd been outside touched the back of the woman's chair and leaned down. "Almost ready," he said. The woman flinched, a micro-expression, gone in a quarter second, and then she nodded without raising her eyes. Ethan took out his phone and typed a text to a number he hadn't used in 14 months. Harlow's on 5th. 2 subjects, possible trafficking. Armed, possibly more outside. "I need eyes on the exits, quiet." "How close are you?" He sent it. Danny Reese had been Ethan's team sergeant for 8 years and currently owned a bar 4 blocks from Harlow's. The odds that Danny was sitting in that bar at 7:45 on a Friday were approximately 100%. The reply came back in 40 seconds. With Marcus. "Give us 3 minutes. Marcus Webb, former Special Forces medic, currently doing corporate security consulting." Ethan had not known they were together, but he had also not known that tonight would require him to call in assets. And the universe had a long history of doing whatever it wanted, regardless of his planning. He typed back, "Exits only. Nothing aggressive until I initiate. Needed invisible. Understood." The server arrived at Ethan's table with a bread basket. "Can I get you something while you wait, sir? I noticed your companion—" "Just water," Ethan said. "And I might need to move tables. Do you have anything closer to the center of the room?" The server blinked. "Closer to the center? Most people prefer near the window wall. Is that available?" Yes. The foretop by the support column is open." "Perfect." He smiled. The smile cost him nothing and bought him a cleaner angle on the target table and a position that put the center support column between him and the front entrance. "I'll take it." He moved tables with his water glass and his bread basket, and Rex, who transferred beneath the new table with the fluid indifference of a dog who had set up in considerably worse positions. The new table was better. He could see both exits. He could see the girl. He could see the man who kept checking his watch. He could also see, through the front window, a dark blue pickup truck that had parked across the street 12 minutes ago and had not moved. Ethan ate a piece of bread. He looked at his phone. No text from Mara, which meant she'd made the call and was staying put as instructed. He checked the time. He'd given the situation a 15-minute window per the man's phone call. 11 minutes remained, 9, by the time he finished calculating. He stood up. Rex stood up with him. Ethan picked up the unfolded napkin from his jacket pocket. He'd transferred it there when he moved tables, and walked across the restaurant toward the girls' table with the measured, unhurried stride of a man who was going to do something simple. The closer he got, the more clearly he could read the geometry of the thing. The first man, the one who'd been outside, was positioned at the girl's left rear. I was right-handed. His jacket sat slightly wrong on the left side, pulling at the button, which meant he was carrying on his right hip under the jacket. The second man was at the right rear, phone in left hand now, weight slightly forward, which meant he was either left-handed or he was positioning his right side away from the room. Both of them saw Ethan approaching. He watched their eyes go through the calculation. Threat assessment. I was a tall man, 6'2", built the way years of physical training built someone. Not bulky, but dense, the kind of frame that read as significant without being theatrical. He was wearing civilian clothes. He had a dog on a loose leash. He was smiling the pleasant, slightly apologetic smile of a man who was about to say something mild. They decided he was not a threat. People decided that about Ethan Cross with some regularity, and it had worked out well for Ethan Cross every single time. "Excuse me." He addressed the table generally, the woman, the girl, the space between everyone, and then held up the napkin. "I think she dropped this." He unfolded it. The help was visible to anyone within 4 feet. The silence lasted approximately 1 second. The first man's hand moved toward his jacket. Rex moved faster. The dog didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He stepped, a single precise repositioning that put 90 pounds of muscle and training directly between the man's right hand and the girl's wheelchair, and then he was still again, teeth showing in the controlled exposure that Ethan had always thought of as Rex's professional face. Not rage, not animal panic, a declaration of terms. The man's hand stopped. His partner had gone very still. "Easy," Ethan said. His voice was quiet enough that no one at adjacent tables could hear it. "Both hands where I can see them, right now." You don't know what you're doing, the first man said. Put your hands on the table. This is a family. She wrote help on a napkin and rolled it across the floor. Ethan held the man's eyes. So let's skip the part where you explain the situation and move directly to hands on the table. The second man's eyes moved toward the entrance. Don't, Ethan said. My people are already at the exits. A beat. Another beat. The woman at the table made a sound. Not quite a word, something compressed and involuntary, the sound of a person who had been holding something inside for a long time and felt it start to break loose. Her hands were still flat on the table, but they were shaking now, the trembling visible from 6 inches away. The girl was looking at Ethan. She hadn't looked away since he'd unfolded the napkin. You're going to be okay, he told her. Not loudly. Not with the performative reassurance that panicked adults gave to children to manage their own anxiety. Just a statement of fact, delivered with the same register he used for everything. What's your name? She opened her mouth. Don't, the first man started. Hey. Ethan's voice dropped 1 register and gained approximately 200 pounds of weight. Do not speak to her. The girl swallowed. Lily, she said. Lily. He nodded once. I'm Ethan. This is Rex. He's the one who noticed the napkin, actually. A small pause. He's very perceptive. Something moved in Lily's face. Not quite a smile, not yet, but the shadow of the possibility of one. Outside, through the front window, the dark blue pickup truck's engine turned over. Ethan saw it in his peripheral. 12 minutes. The pickup had come 5 minutes early. He pulled out his phone and typed a single word to Danny, now. And then the second man pushed back his chair and his hand came out from under the table, and there was a gun in it, and the restaurant stopped being quiet. The jazz quartet didn't notice immediately. They finished the measure they were on. And then a woman at the table nearest the window screamed, and the measure ended, and in the 3 seconds of overlapping chaos that followed, 2 things happened that Ethan had anticipated, and 1 thing happened that he had not. The things he'd anticipated. The first man reaching for his weapon, and Rex, already in position, already committed, taking the arm before it cleared the holster. The thing he had not anticipated, Lily, 8 years old, leg brace and all, leaning forward in her wheelchair and grabbing the second man's gun wrist with both hands, and holding on. She didn't disarm him. She didn't have the strength for that. But she held on long enough, 2 seconds, maybe 3, for Ethan to cross the distance. It was enough. The gun hit the floor. The man hit the floor 2 seconds later. Ethan put him there with an efficiency that required no elaboration and left no question about the outcome. Rex had the first man pinned and compliant and thoroughly uninterested in further resistance. The front entrance burst open. Not police, not yet, but Danny Reese, who was 6'4" and built like a piece of agricultural equipment, and Marcus Webb behind him, who was smaller and quieter and considerably more dangerous, and they moved through the panicking diners with the specific, unhurried authority of men who had navigated worse rooms. 2 outside, Ethan said. Blue pickup, east side of the street. On it, Marcus said, and went back out without stopping. Danny looked at the men on the floor. He looked at Rex. He looked at Ethan. You started without me, he said. You were 4 minutes away. I said 3. It was 4. The woman, Lily's mother, had come around the table and was on her knees in front of the wheelchair with her arms around her daughter, and she was making the sound that Ethan had heard before from people whose bodies were releasing something they'd been holding at sustained cost for a very long time. It was not a pretty sound. It was the opposite of a pretty sound. It was entirely human, and it filled the suddenly silent restaurant the way only genuine things did. Police came through the door 30 seconds later. Plain clothes, as Mara had requested. 2 detectives in street clothes with badges on lanyards, followed by uniformed officers who'd entered through the kitchen to block the rear. Ethan stepped back. He put his hands visible, both of them, without being asked. Rex sat at his side. One of the detectives, a woman, mid-40s, the particular tired and competent look of someone who'd seen most of what the job had to offer, moved through the room with her badge already out, and her eyes doing the same thing Ethan's eyes had been doing for the last 20 minutes, which was cataloging everything. She stopped in front of him. You the one who called it in? My daughter did. I asked her to. The detective looked at Rex. She looked at the 2 men on the floor. She looked at the broken chair, the overturned glasses, the napkin still lying open on the nearest table. Sir, she said carefully. Can you walk me through exactly what happened here? Ethan looked at Lily. Lily was still in her mother's arms, but she was looking at him over her mother's shoulder, and the expression on her face was something Ethan Cross had not seen directed at him in a long time. It was the expression of someone who had chosen to trust and discovered that the choice had been right. He looked back at the detective. It started with the napkin, he said. Outside, the sound of a police radio crackled through the open door. Marcus's voice came through it, calm and flat. 2 subjects detained, blue pickup, no shots fired. Danny was already on his phone talking to someone, his hand on the back of a chair, his voice low and organized. The jazz quartet had set down their instruments. The restaurant was quiet in the particular way restaurants were quiet after violence moved through them. Not peaceful, but stunned, every person still processing the gap between what the evening had promised and what it had delivered. Ethan Cross sat down in the nearest empty chair. Rex lay down beside him. Somewhere across the room, Lily's mother was still making that sound, quieter now, winding down. And Lily was patting her back with one small hand methodically, like she'd done it before. The detective had her notebook out. She was writing something. Ethan's phone buzzed. Mara, can I come out now? He typed back, yes, stay near the entrance. A pause. Mara, Dad? Ethan, yeah. Mara, happy birthday me, I guess. He almost smiled. He was still looking at the detective's notebook, watching her write, when he heard the first man on the floor say something, quietly, directed at his partner, in a language that wasn't English. Ethan's Arabic was functional and his Dari was reasonable, but this was neither. It took him 3 seconds to identify it as a regional dialect he'd encountered twice, both times in the same operational context. The same network. The same organization. He'd thought coming into this restaurant tonight that the worst thing that could happen was that the breadbasket would be disappointing. He'd been wrong about that. The detective looked up from her notebook. Mr. Cross, she said, the network these men belong to. We've been trying to get a foothold on them for 8 months. She paused. Do you have any idea how far this goes? Ethan looked at the napkin on the table. He looked at Lily. No, he said. But I think I need to find out. The detective held his eyes for a moment. Then she closed her notebook, and something in her expression shifted. Not softness exactly, but a kind of recognition, one professional reading the quality of another. We should talk, she said, somewhere quieter. Outside, a second police unit had arrived. The blue pickup was being searched. Danny's voice had dropped even lower on the phone. Marcus had not come back in yet, which meant Marcus had found something worth staying outside for. Ethan Cross stood up from the chair. Rex stood up with him. Lead the way, Ethan said. The detective's name was Sandra Okafor, and she had the kind of office that told you everything about how she worked. Stacks of files that looked chaotic, but weren't. A whiteboard covered in names connected by lines that had been erased and redrawn so many times the surface had gone gray, and a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't been turned off in several months. She'd commandeered a conference room at the 4th District Station instead, because the conference room had a table big enough to spread things out, and because her actual office had a broken ceiling tile that dripped when it rained, and it had been raining for 3 days. It was 10:47 at night. Ethan sat across from her with a paper cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the previous administration. Rex was under the table. Mara had been driven home by Danny, who had also, without being asked, arranged for someone to sit outside her apartment building for the night. Ethan hadn't told him to do that. Danny had done it the way Danny did most things, without ceremony, without discussion, because it was the correct action and therefore required no further justification. Okafor had her notebook open and a second detective beside her, a younger man named Rourke, who had the specific energy of someone who had been told this was a standard Friday night call and had since revised that assessment significantly. He hadn't said much. He kept looking at the photographs Okafor was laying on the table. These two, she said, pointing to the men from the restaurant, are Eric Holt and James Carver, which are not their real names, but they're the names on the documentation we've run so far. Both have prints in the federal system. Holt came up connected to a trafficking case in Georgia that went cold 4 years ago. Carver's prints pulled a partial match to an Interpol flag, but the flag's got a jurisdiction hold on it from a European partner agency. She paused. Which is its own conversation. The two from the pickup? Ethan said. One of them lawyered up before he finished the sentence. The other one hasn't spoken at all. Rourke said it flatly. Not a word. Not his name. Not a request for water. Nothing. Just sits there. Ethan looked at the photos. The men from the restaurant stared back from booking images with the particular blankness of people who'd been through this before and knew what it cost to show anything. The language, Ethan said. What Holt said to Carver on the floor. Has anyone identified it? Okafor looked at him more carefully. You caught that. I've heard it before, twice, both times in the same operational context. A network we were briefed on in 19. I don't know what the current status of that intelligence is. What was the network? I can't tell you in this room. Rourke looked up from his notepad. Mr. Cross, I'm a civilian who witnessed a crime and intervened to prevent harm, Ethan said, which means I'm cooperating voluntarily. I'm happy to keep doing that. A beat. But that particular information has a classification I don't have the authority to discuss outside the appropriate channel. Get someone on the phone from DHS or FBI task force. Tonight if possible. Because if I'm right about the network, you're not looking at two guys. Okafor studied him. How many are you looking at? In this city? I don't know. Nationally? He picked up his coffee. More than you want to hear at 11 o'clock. She was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled a different photograph from the stack. Not a booking photo. A surveillance image, grainy and shot at distance, showing a warehouse exterior with a partial license plate visible. We've had this for 6 weeks, she said. It came from a source that's since gone dark. We've been trying to build enough to get a warrant for the interior. She slid it toward him. Does anything about it look familiar to you? Ethan looked at the photograph. The warehouse was concrete, industrial, nothing distinctive about the structure itself. But the partial plate was from a series he recognized, a rental fleet, the kind of anonymous white cargo vans that trafficking networks use specifically because they were interchangeable and nationwide. More importantly, there was a detail in the upper right corner of the image that wasn't obvious unless you were looking for it. A small secondary door cut into the wall at ground level, about 18 inches wide, the kind of access panel that building inspectors sometimes required but building owners rarely maintained. It had been modified. The hinges were wrong, too heavy, replaced, not original to the structure. Have you had eyes inside? He said. No. Then you don't have the full picture of the structure. He set down the coffee. That secondary door. The hinges have been changed. That tells you the door is used regularly and needs to handle weight. The original fire egress doors in an industrial building that size open outward. This one was rehung to open inward. He looked at Okafor. That's deliberate. Someone wanted to control what moved through it. Rourke was writing something. Okafor wasn't. She was watching Ethan. Where'd you serve? She said. DevGru, 3rd Squadron. She nodded once, the way people nodded when the information settled something they'd been calculating without realizing it. How long out? 2 years. And you're doing what now? Nothing, Ethan said. I'm doing nothing now. It came out flatter than he intended. He picked up the coffee again, and the truth of the statement sat in the room between them the way flat statements did when they weren't quite the whole story, accurate on the surface and hollow underneath. He had been doing nothing for 2 years. That was literally and precisely true. He had a house in the Kensington district that he'd bought because Mara's college was 40 minutes away, and he'd wanted to be close. He had Rex. He had a consulting arrangement with a security firm that generated enough income to not require attention. He ran 6 miles every morning at 5:45 because his body still woke at 5:15 regardless of what he asked it to do. And the 6 miles filled the gap between waking and the hour when other people started existing visibly in the world. He had not touched a case file, a mission brief, or a weapons system in 24 months. He had, in the language of the VA counselor he'd seen 4 times before stopping, initiated a transition process. What he had not done was complete it. Look, Okafor said, setting down her pen. I need to ask you something straight. Go ahead. The way you handled that room tonight, the positioning, the backup already in place, blocking the exits before we were even called. That's not a civilian witness who happened to be in the right place. That's someone who ran an operation. I had information that suggested a threat. I responded to it. In under 20 minutes. I had good assets close by. Ethan. She said his name like she was testing it. I've been working this case for 8 months. I have 2 detectives and a half-time analyst and a warrant request that's been sitting in a judge's inbox for 6 weeks because we don't have enough for probable cause. Tonight you walked into a restaurant, and in 20 minutes you did more than we've done in 8 months. She paused. I'm not saying that to compliment you. I'm saying it because I need to know if you're willing to do more. The conference room was quiet. Rourke had stopped writing. Ethan looked at the surveillance photograph of the warehouse. He looked at the modified door. He looked at the partial plate number in the corner of the image. The girl, he said. Lily. What's her situation? She and her mother are at a safe location tonight. We'll do a full interview with the mother tomorrow once the victim advocate's in place. Okafor's voice shifted slightly when she said it. Not softer, but more careful. The mother's name is Claire Vasquez. The daughter is Lily Vasquez, 8 years old, congenital bone condition affecting her right leg. They were approached 6 weeks ago by someone posing as a medical outreach program offering free specialist treatment. By the time Claire understood what she'd walked into, they had enough on her, financial, immigration, to keep her in line. Ethan said nothing. Lily's been writing notes for 3 weeks, Okafor continued. Help on anything she could find. Most of them got caught. Tonight was the first one that made it out. She looked at him steadily. Because you were there, and you were looking. Ethan Cross had survived 17 years in environments where the margin between an outcome and its opposite was measured in seconds and in the quality of attention you brought to the moment. He had operated in places where the word help was never written on napkins, because there were no napkins, no restaurants, no possibility of someone like him being in the right position. He thought about Lily holding the man's wrist. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. He thought about the way she'd looked at him over her mother's shoulder, not with the desperate gratitude of a person who'd been saved, but with the quiet, exhausted relief of a person who had done everything they could and finally gotten help. What's the analyst's name? He said. Okafor blinked. What? The halftime analyst. What's her name? His name, Darren Walsh. Why? Because I want to look at everything you have on this network. Tonight, if Walsh is still in the building. And I want to make some calls tomorrow morning. There are people who owe me information and who will give it to me if I ask the right way. He stood up, and Rex came out from under the table. I'm not joining your task force, detective. I'm not a federal employee, and I'm not looking to be one. But you're right that I can do things you can't, and you have information I need, and somewhere in this city there's a warehouse with a modified door and a lot of people inside it who wrote notes that nobody found. Okafor looked at him for a long moment. Walsh is in the bullpen, she said, 3rd desk from the window. Darren Walsh was 26 years old and had the coloring of someone who spent most of his time indoors under fluorescent lighting. I was not, at first look, someone you would hire if what you wanted was confidence. He wore his lanyard tucked into his shirt, kept 3 browser windows open simultaneously, and when Ethan sat down across from him at 11:15 at night, the first thing Walsh did was look over his shoulder to see if Okafor had sent Ethan or if Ethan had arrived by some mechanism Walsh hadn't authorized. She sent me, Ethan said. Right. Walsh looked at Rex. Rex looked at Walsh. He's fine. He won't bother you. Right. Walsh turned back to his screens. So, what are you looking for? Everything you have on the network, cross-referenced arrests, geographic spread, any communication intercepts that have been cleared for your level, transportation patterns. Ethan pulled his chair closer to the desk. And the partial plate from the warehouse image. Where are you on running that down? Walsh's typing slowed incrementally. The plate series comes back to a fleet registered to a shell company out of Delaware. The shell links to a holding company in Nevada. We've traced it 2 more levels and hit a wall because the 4th entity is incorporated in the Cayman Islands. And the paper trail requires an international legal request that's been pending for 4 months? Walsh glanced at him. 3.5. Okay. Ethan pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, actual paper, the kind that didn't require a battery, and wrote down the Delaware Shell Company name that Walsh had on his screen. I know someone who does asset tracing for an insurance group that has relationships with Cayman registrars. She's done this kind of trace in 48 hours before. If I send her the chain you've built, how fast can you get me the documentation? Walsh stared at him. I have it, Walsh said slowly. I mean, it's compiled. I've been working on it for 2 months. It's all in the file. Send it to this address. Ethan wrote an email on the notebook page, tore it out, handed it over. Walsh looked at it. That's not a department address. No. I can't send case materials to a non-department. Have Okafor authorize it. She's 30 feet away. Ethan met the analyst's eyes. Walsh, I'm not trying to make your job harder. I'm trying to give this thing legs it doesn't currently have, and the way I do that is by making calls that you legally can't make. But I need the foundation you've already built, or I'm starting from scratch and we lose time. He paused. How many people are in that warehouse? Best estimate. Walsh opened a different window. A map appeared. Satellite imagery, the industrial district on the eastern side of the city, and a pin dropped on a block that Ethan hadn't seen before. Based on supply delivery patterns we've tracked, food, water, hygiene supplies, bought in bulk from 3 different distributors, we estimate between 18 and 30 individuals. The deliveries happen on a rotating schedule, different drivers each time, no single vendor used twice in a row. He zoomed in on the satellite image. The structure has no public utilities connected in its current registered name. Power's being drawn from an adjacent property. Ethan looked at the map. Show me the approach routes. Walsh pulled up a street-level overlay. There are 3 vehicle access points. The main loading dock faces. No, show me the foot approaches. Within 300 meters. Walsh's hand slowed on the keyboard. He was recalculating something. You're thinking about going in. I'm thinking about understanding the geometry. Show me the foot approaches. The analyst pulled up a different layer. Ethan studied it for 4 minutes without speaking. Walsh let him. The bullpen was quiet, 2 other analysts working at desks on the far side of the room, neither paying attention to the corner where a man with a dog was looking at a map at 11:30 at night. The approaches were workable. 2 of the 3 vehicle access points could be controlled with 2 people each, which meant 4 people minimum to seal the structure. The foot approach from the east had a natural choke point, a gap between a chain-link fence and a concrete retaining wall, narrow enough that it could be watched by a single person with line of sight. The modified door was on the south face. Ethan made notes. What's the warrant status? He said. Still pending. Walsh's voice had the particular flatness of a person who had said those 2 words so many times they'd stopped having normal emotional weight. Judge Price has had it for 6 weeks. The ADA who filed it says Price is waiting for additional probable cause because the evidence of habitation is circumstantial. 2 men connected to the network were arrested tonight at Harlow's. Yes. With a victim who is being actively transported. Yes. That's not circumstantial. No. Walsh said it carefully. It's not. Ethan looked at him. Walsh looked back. Okafor filed the supplemental tonight, Walsh said. Before you came in here. The ADA has already been contacted. If Price reviews it in the morning, when does Price typically arrive at Chambers? 8:15. Ethan checked his watch. 8 hours and 22 minutes. He thought about 18 to 30 people in a warehouse. He thought about supply deliveries on rotating schedules, different drivers, no vendor used twice. He thought about the level of operational security that kind of logistics required, and what that level of operational security meant about how the people running it would respond when they found out 2 of their people had been arrested at a restaurant. They already knew. They had to know. The pickup truck hadn't waited for confirmation. Those men had been positioned outside Harlow's, which meant someone had been monitoring the situation in real time, and when it went wrong, the information would have traveled instantly. They had 18 to 30 people in a warehouse, and they knew the clock had started. How current is this satellite imagery? Ethan said. Walsh hesitated. 48 hours. So we don't know what it looks like tonight. No. Ethan stood up. Rex stood with him. Ethan looked at the map one more time. The modified door, the south face, the choke point on the eastern approach. And then he took out his phone and called Danny. Danny picked up on the second ring, which meant Danny was awake and had been waiting. We have a location, Ethan said. I need eyes on it. Passive only. Observation, no approach, nothing that constitutes trespass. I need to know if there's movement, if anything is being loaded or unloaded, if the vehicle situation changes. A pause. You think they're going to move tonight, Danny said. I think they know their people are in custody. I think they're good at this. And I think whoever's running this network did not get this far by leaving assets in place when the situation compromised. Another pause. Longer. Marcus is with me, Danny said. We'll take my truck. I'll send you the address. He texted it, dropped the phone back in his pocket, and looked at Walsh. When Okafor comes back, tell her I've got eyes on the location. And tell her she needs to be ready to move the moment price signs. He picked up his jacket. Don't let anyone below her authority know the location is under observation. Not dispatch, not the duty sergeant, just Okafor. Walsh was writing something down. His lanyard had come out from his shirt at some point during the last hour and was hanging free now, and there was a quality to his focus that had changed. The slight unfocusing of someone who was tracking several things at once and had started, perhaps for the first time in several months, to believe they might converge. Mr. Cross, Walsh said. Ethan stopped. The people in that building. Walsh kept his eyes on his notepad. Some of them have probably been in there for a long time. Yes. And if the network moves them tonight, I know. Walsh nodded once, very slightly, and turned back to his screens. Ethan walked to the door. In the parking lot, he sat in his truck for 3 minutes with Rex beside him and the engine off and the city making its ordinary sounds around him. A distant siren, someone's music, a truck downshifting on the bridge 2 blocks north. He thought about the 2 years he'd spent assembling a life that required nothing of him. The house, the morning run, the security consulting that he'd never once found interesting. He thought about the napkin, the H larger than the other letters, the P smeared at the bottom. He started the engine. Danny's first text came through at 12:47. Lights still on interior. 1 guard visible south face. Vehicle count, 3 vans, 1 sedan. The second text came at 1:18. Second guard appeared. East approach. They're moving people to the loading dock. Ethan was already driving when the third text arrived. Danny, they're loading the vans. He called Okafor. She picked up before the first ring finished. They're moving, he said. You need Price on the phone right now. A half-second pause. Then, I'll call you back in 4 minutes. She called back in 3. Price won't sign without in-person review. He wants to see the supplemental himself. I have to go to his house. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not panic, something more disciplined than panic, but made of the same material. That's 40 minutes from here. Ethan did the math. 3 vans. Loading now. 40 minutes to a signature. An unknown amount of time to mobilize a response. Then you need to drive fast, he said. Cross, drive fast, detective. He hung up. He texted Danny. Slow them down. Whatever you can do that doesn't cross a line, stall. A long pause. Danny. Define cross a line. Ethan. Use your judgment. Danny. That's what I was afraid of. The city moved past the windows of the truck. Ethan drove toward the industrial district with the particular focused quiet of a man who had learned a long time ago that the distance between a good outcome and a catastrophic one was usually measured in minutes, and that the only productive response to that fact was to use every minute you had. Rex sat in the passenger seat with his head slightly forward, ears up, watching the road. In 40 minutes, either Okafor had a warrant or she didn't. In 40 minutes, either the vans were still there or they weren't. Ethan parked 3 blocks from the warehouse on a dead-end service road, engine off, lights off, and picked up his phone to text Danny his position. Danny's reply came back immediately. 1 van just left, going east. I'm on it. And then, 10 seconds later, Ethan. There's a kid in the window of the warehouse. 2nd floor. Ethan looked at the message. Small, pressed against the glass. He put the truck in drive. Before he finished reading the message. 3 blocks dissolved in under 40 seconds. He killed the headlights at the last corner and coasted to a stop on the service road parallel to the warehouse's south face. Engine off, momentum carrying him the last 20 feet to the curb. Rex was already up in the passenger seat, body forward, nose working the gap at the window's edge. Ethan texted Danny. Which window? 2nd floor? Which side? The reply came in 11 seconds. Southeast corner. Above the modified door. He got out of the truck without closing the door all the way, catching it before the latch engaged, easing it shut with his palm flat against the frame. Rex came out the same side, silent, staying low at Ethan's left knee, the way he'd been trained to move in environments where noise had consequences. The warehouse was a concrete rectangle, maybe 90 feet on its short face, probably 140 on its long axis. The second-floor windows were industrial, wire mesh safety glass, the kind that didn't break cleanly. Most were dark. The southeast corner window had a faint smear of light behind it, not from a fixture, from something lower down, something on the floor below the sill. A flashlight, maybe. Or the glow of a phone screen. Ethan pressed his back against the chain-link fence and studied the south face. The modified door was 30 feet to his left. One guard, Danny had said. South face. The guard wasn't visible from Ethan's current position, which meant either the guard had moved to the loading dock area, which was around the building's west corner, or the guard was standing in a position that put the door itself between him and Ethan's line of sight. He waited. 45 seconds. A cigarette ember. Left of the door, maybe 10 feet, where the wall made a slight inset for a utility panel. The ember moved, hand raising, hand lowering, and the guard's silhouette became visible against the slightly less dark concrete. He was watching the loading dock direction. His back was mostly toward the south. Ethan pulled out his phone and called Okafor. It rang 4 times. "I'm in the car," she said. 20 minutes from Price. "We have a problem. One van is already moving. Danny's tracking it going east. There's a child visible in a second-floor window. They're loading people, Sandra. Whatever's going to happen needs to happen in the next 20 minutes, or we lose them." A silence that lasted 2 full seconds, which was a long silence for Okafor. "I can't execute a warrant I don't have yet. I know that. So what are you telling me?" "I'm telling you the situation. What you do with it is your call." He watched the guard's cigarette ember. "But if that van gets on a highway with people inside it, you know what the recovery odds look like." Another silence. "Don't do anything I can't explain to a judge," she said. "Drive fast." He hung up. He thought about what she'd said. "Don't do anything I can't explain to a judge." It was careful phrasing. It was not the same as "don't do anything." He'd noticed that, and he suspected she'd intended him to notice it. He texted Marcus, who had gone quiet for the last 40 minutes. "What's your position?" Marcus. "Loading dock west side, 2 guards here, 3 people being walked to the second van. Adults, I think, can't confirm. Moving slow." Ethan. "Keep eyes only. Do not engage." Marcus. "Understood." "But Ethan, one of the people they just walked out. She's not moving right, like she's been sitting still for a long time." Ethan stared at the message. He looked at the southeast window. The smear of light was still there, still low against the sill. He made a decision the way he'd always made operational decisions, not by resolving the uncertainty, because the uncertainty never resolved, but by determining which risk he could live with and which one he couldn't. The risk of acting without a warrant was administrative, legal, professional. The risk of not acting was in a moving van going east and a child pressed against wire mesh glass in the dark. He moved toward the modified door. The guard's cigarette ember was still pointing west. Ethan crossed the 20 feet of open ground between the fence and the wall in 8 seconds, staying below the guard's natural sight line, placing each step with the controlled, deliberate pressure that minimized sound on loose gravel. Rex moved with him, not commanded, not leashed, simply present at his left side in the way the dog had learned to be present when the situation required it, which was a kind of training that went beyond any protocol and had more to do with 2 years in the same environments than with any formal instruction. He reached the wall. The guard was 6 feet to his left, around the slight inset. He could hear the man breathing, slow, bored breathing, the breathing of someone who'd been standing in the same position for long enough that alertness had eroded into routine. The cigarette ember moved again. The man shifted his weight. Ethan examined the modified door. The hinges were heavy-duty commercial hardware, surface-mounted on the exterior, which meant the door swung inward as he'd analyzed from the photograph. There was no visible lock mechanism on the outside. It was secured from within, which meant it was either bolted or barred. He placed 2 fingers against the door's edge and applied slight pressure. No movement, solid resistance, barred. He pulled back and thought. The window above him, the southeast corner, second floor, had the smear of light behind it. He stepped back from the wall 3 feet and looked up. The wire mesh in the glass was standard commercial gauge. The window frame was aluminum, probably original to the building's construction, which put it at 30 or 40 years old. Original aluminum frames in industrial buildings had a specific failure mode. The gaskets dried out, the frames lost their compression seal, and the window itself sat in its track without mechanical fastening, held in place by friction and the weight of the glass rather than by any locking mechanism. Second floor was 18 feet up. He looked at the wall surface. Concrete block, unfinished. The mortar lines between the blocks were recessed, not deeply, but enough. He'd free-climbed worse surfaces with worse footwear for worse reasons. He put his phone to his ear and called Danny. "I need the guard on the south face occupied," he said quietly. Not confronted, occupied, something that pulls his attention east, away from the building, for 90 seconds. A pause. 90 seconds, Danny repeated. "Give me 90 and I'm through a window." "You're going up the wall?" "Yes." "In civilian clothes?" "Yes." A longer pause. "Hold for 60. Ethan held. At 53 seconds, from somewhere to the east, 2 blocks, maybe 2.5, came the sound of a car alarm. Then the unmistakable crash of a trash container hitting asphalt, loud and metallic, and followed by an engine revving. Nothing violent, nothing that read as a threat, just noise, the ordinary chaos of a city at night, the kind of thing that a bored guard would turn toward involuntarily. The cigarette ember swung east. Ethan went up the wall. The mortar lines gave him what he needed. Not comfortable, not secure, but enough. He moved fast, using the momentum the way he'd been taught to use it. Weight forward into the wall rather than pulling away from it. Each foothold a 2-second commitment. Rex sat at the base of the wall below and watched him with the patient attention of an animal that had made peace with the particular kinds of things his person did. The window frame was at 18 feet. He reached it, hooked his fingers over the aluminum sill, and felt the frame give under lateral pressure. The old gasket, dried and crumbling, releasing without resistance. He pushed the window inward, slow, controlled, and pulled himself up and over the sill and dropped onto a concrete floor on the other side, in a motion that made less noise than he'd feared. He was in. The second floor was a single open space, old office area, the partitions long since removed, the drop ceiling tiles gone, bare structural beams above. The light he'd seen from outside was coming from the far end of the room, near the southeast corner. A camping lantern, the kind that ran on rechargeable batteries, sitting on the floor with its intensity turned low. Around it, against the wall, were 7 people, adults. 5 women and 2 men, or what had been adults before however many weeks they'd spent in this building, because they had the specific quality of people whose bodies had been reducing themselves through stress and poor nutrition and the sustained metabolic cost of fear. They were sitting, most of them. A few were lying on what appeared to be foam pads. None of them were restrained. None of them needed to be. The door at the far end of the room, the only interior door visible, was solid steel, and the padlock on the exterior hasp was the size of Ethan's fist. He was across the room in 8 steps. He crouched down in front of the nearest person, a woman, perhaps 35, with dark hair and the particular stillness of someone who had learned to make herself small. She flinched when he appeared in her periphery. "I'm not with them," he said very quietly. "I'm trying to get you out. Don't make noise. Can you understand me?" She looked at him. Her eyes moved over his face, his clothes, the absence of any insignia that would identify him as someone official, and he watched the calculation happen. The exact same calculation Lily had made across the restaurant, the weighing of one unknown against another. "Yes," she whispered. "How many people are in this building total? Not this room, though. The whole building." She thought. There were more. They moved some tonight. Maybe... She looked at the others, a quick head count of some kind happening behind her eyes. "There were 22 of us 3 days ago. They took some today. I don't know how many are left downstairs." "Children?" A pause. 2, she said. "They kept them separate. Ground level, east side." Ethan stood up. He went to the window he'd come through and looked down. Rex was sitting exactly where he'd left him. He pulled out his phone and texted Marcus, "East side ground level, 2 children. That's your priority if this moves." Marcus, "On it." He texted Okafor, "I'm inside. 2nd floor, 7 adults. 2 children reported on ground level east." "How long?" 12 seconds. Okafor, "Price is signing. 8 minutes. 8 minutes." He texted Danny, Can you still see the first van? Danny. Negative. Lost it 2 minutes ago near the highway interchange. Sent the plate to Rourke. Ethan put the phone away. 7 people against the wall in the lantern light, looking at him with the particular expression of people who had been in the dark long enough that they weren't sure yet what he represented. He recognized the expression. He'd seen it before, not in warehouses exactly, but in equivalent places, rooms and compounds in provinces whose names he couldn't speak publicly, where people had been reduced to their most fundamental operating mode, which was waiting for the next thing to happen to them and hoping it would be different from the last. "There are police coming," he said, keeping his voice at the low register that carried without projecting. 8 minutes, maybe less. When they arrive, you will hear a lot of noise. You stay in this room, stay low, stay away from the door and the windows. Can everyone understand English? He looked around. 2 people shook their heads slightly. He repeated it in Spanish, which was functional, if not fluent. A third person added something in a language he didn't have, and one of the women translated it. She spoke 3 languages, apparently, which was the kind of detail you noticed and then set aside because there wasn't time. He went to the steel door and looked at the hasp. The padlock was serious. Hardened shackle, shrouded, the kind that resisted cutting and had a pick-resistant cylinder. He didn't have bolt cutters. He had his hands, his phone, a folding knife that was useful for nothing related to that padlock, and whatever the room contained. He scanned the room. Against the opposite wall, partially hidden under a section of collapsed drop-ceiling tile, was a length of steel conduit, electrical conduit, galvanized, roughly 4 feet long and 1.25 inches in diameter. He picked it up. The padlock hasp was screwed into the door frame with 4 screws. He could see the screw heads, Phillips drive, probably 3-inch structural screws into the wood frame behind the steel door panel. He wasn't going to remove those. But the hasp plate itself was surface-mounted, and the door frame was old, and the wood behind the steel panel had the specific give of material that had been sitting in a climate-uncontrolled industrial building for 30 years. He fitted the conduit through the padlock's shackle and against the hasp plate. He pulled. The first application of force produced nothing except the sound of the conduit creaking. He repositioned, changed his grip, bent his knees, and applied force from a lower center of gravity. The second application produced a groan from the door frame, wood compressing, then beginning to separate. The third produced a crack that he felt more than heard, a deep structural pop, and the hasp plate came away from the frame with the screws still in it, taking a substantial section of door frame wood with it. The padlock dropped. The door swung 3 inches inward under its own weight. Someone in the room made a sound. "Quiet," Ethan said. He eased the door open 6 inches and looked through the gap. A stairwell. Concrete. Industrial fluorescent lighting on the ceiling, 1 tube dead, 1 flickering. The stairs going down to the left, going up to roof access on the right. From below, faint but present, voices. 2 of them, maybe 3, and underneath the voices the sound of movement, the specific shuffling of people and cargo being organized. He listened for 30 seconds. 2 distinct voices below. One of them appeared to be giving directions, short, clipped instructions in English that he could make out in fragments. "Move it, the second van needs," and "not yet, wait for," and then something he couldn't parse because someone scraped something heavy across concrete and the sound buried the words. His phone vibrated. Okafor, signed, moving now. ETA 6 minutes, 2 units, 6 minutes. He looked back into the room at the 7 people in the lantern light. 7 people who had been sitting against that wall for days or weeks. 7 people who were looking at him now with the exact quality of attention that people gave to the one thing in the room that represented the possibility of a different outcome. He almost went back in. He almost told them to stay, closed the door, waited the 6 minutes. Then from below, a child's voice. Not words. A sound, brief, immediately suppressed. The kind of sound a child made when they were startled and had already learned that making sounds had consequences. He went down the stairs. He moved on the outside edge of each step, where the concrete met the wall, where the structural support made the surface least likely to flex and transmit sound. Left hand on the wall, right hand free. Rex was still outside. He'd considered this when he came through the window, the calculation of whether the dog's presence in a confined stairwell would help or complicate what he didn't yet know he was going to find. and he decided that a dog appearing in a dark building full of traumatized people was a variable he should control. He reached the ground floor landing. The stairwell door here was open, propped with a wooden wedge, the hallway beyond it lit by a single overhead work light on a cord. The hallway ran the length of the building's east face, and at its far end, 30 feet away, a door was ajar, and through the gap Ethan could see the corner of a cot, a folded blanket, the edge of something small. To his left, 20 feet, was the loading dock area. The voices were coming from there. He went right. The door at the end of the hall opened into a space that had once been a building manager's office. Maybe 12 by 15 feet, drop ceiling intact in here, one of the fluorescent tubes working. There were 2 cots. On one of them, a boy, 7 or 8, shoes still on, had curled himself into the corner where the cot met the wall and was watching the door with the specific wide-eye stillness of a child who had learned that watching was safer than moving. On the other cot, sitting upright with her arms around her knees, was a girl who Ethan did not immediately recognize because her hair was different, and she was wearing clothes he hadn't seen before, and the light was wrong. But then she looked at him, and he recognized the eyes. Dark brown, slightly too large for her face, framed by lashes that were wet. The leg brace was on the floor beside the cot. Bright blue. Velcro straps. Lily Vasquez looked at Ethan Cross, and her mouth opened and nothing came out for a moment, and then she said very quietly, "You came back." Something moved through Ethan's chest that he didn't have a clean word for. Not surprise. Surprise was too small for it, and he wasn't sure he'd been capable of surprise in the clinical sense for a long time. Something older. Something that had to do with the distance between what you prepared for and what you found. "I came back," he said. "They took us from the police place." Her voice was barely audible. "A man came with a badge. He said we were being moved to somewhere safe." Ethan went very still. "What did he look like?" "Tall. He had a black jacket. He showed my mom a card." She swallowed. "My mom didn't want to go, but he said—" She stopped. "Where's my mom?" Ethan looked at the boy on the other cot. The boy was watching him with the same stillness as before, processing, deciding. He looked back at Lily. "We're going to find her," he said. He meant it. He had no mechanism yet for how it would be true, but he meant it the way you meant the things you said to people who needed them to be true. "Is Rex outside?" "Yes." "Okay." She reached for the leg brace on the floor and began to put it on with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times, fingers working the Velcro straps in order without looking down. "I can walk some. It'll be slow. We're not in a hurry yet." That was not entirely true, but it was true enough for the next 2 minutes. He pulled out his phone and called Okafor directly. She answered on the first ring. "I've got a problem," he said. "Lily Vasquez is in the warehouse. She was removed from police custody tonight. Someone with a badge and a black jacket told her mother they were being relocated to a safe location. I need you to find out who authorized that move right now." A silence that lasted long enough that he could hear her breathing change. "That's not possible," she said. "She's in front of me, detective. Find out." He heard her say something away from the phone, short, sharp, to Rourke or someone near her, and then she came back. "How is she?" Functional, scared, asking about her mother. He moved to the door and checked the hallway. Still clear. "There are 2 children here. I need your units to come in quiet. No sirens, no lights until you're at the perimeter. If there are people in that loading dock and they hear sirens, the second van moves." 5 minutes, she said. 4 would be better. He hung up. Lily had the leg brace on. She'd stood up from the cot, carefully, putting weight on it in stages, the way someone did when they were testing whether it was going to hold. The boy on the other cot had pulled his legs off the edge and was sitting on the cot's side, watching. "What's your name?" Ethan asked him. "Tomas," the boy said. Then, after a moment, "Is there a dog?" "Outside. His name is Rex. He's going to be the first thing you see when we go out, so I wanted you to know in advance." Tomas looked at the floor. "Is he mean?" "He's professional," Ethan said, "which means he's mean to specific people for specific reasons. You're not one of those reasons." Something moved in the boy's face. Not quite a smile either, but close to what Lily had almost managed in the restaurant, the shadow of a thing that had been suppressed for long enough that it had to rebuild itself from components. From the loading dock direction, the voices had gone quiet. Ethan noticed it at the same moment. Rex, from outside, barked once. A single sharp alert bark, not sustained, not the attack bark, the there is something bark. Then the hallway light went out. Not the building's power, just the work light on the cord, like someone had reached up and pulled the plug. The hallway went dark. And from the loading dock, 20 feet away, a door opened. Ethan put himself in front of both children without thinking about it. The movement entirely automatic, body between the door and them, hand on the wall for orientation in the sudden dark. Footsteps in the hallway. One person. Moving fast. He measured the sound, heel strike, gait length, the particular rhythm of someone who knew the space, and calculated where in the hallway they were. 10 feet, 7, 5. The figure came through the office door and Ethan had him. Left hand catching the jacket, right hand controlling the arm, body going sideways and down. And then the figure made a sound that stopped him. "Cross! It's me!" The voice was Marcus Webb's. Ethan released him. Marcus straightened up in the dark, breathing harder than usual. "Loading dock is clear. Both guards went with the second van. I watched them go." He paused. "Van left 2 minutes ago. I got the plate." "Lily's here," Ethan said. A silence. "I see her," Marcus said. "Someone pulled her from custody tonight. Badge and a black jacket. Whoever they are, they knew which safe location she'd been taken to, and they knew how to clear it." Another silence, longer. "That's inside information," Marcus said. "Yes." "From inside the department." "Yes." The words sat in the dark room between them like a thing with weight. Inside the department. Someone with access to relocation records, and enough authority to present credentials and walk a child and her mother out of a secure location without triggering an alarm. Ethan's phone buzzed. "Okafor, units 2 minutes out. And Cross. Nobody authorized a transfer tonight. I've checked every log. Lily Vasquez and her mother were signed in at 9:47 p.m. and have not been signed out. Officially, they're still there." He read the message twice. He read it a second time, not because he hadn't understood it the first time, but because the first time produced a specific internal response that he needed to let settle before he could be useful. The cold, focused settling that happened when a situation revealed itself to be larger than its surface had suggested. Lily was looking at him. Even in the near dark, he could feel her eyes on him. "Lily," he said carefully, "the man with the badge who came to get you and your mother. Did he say anything else? Anything you remember?" She was quiet for a moment, the silence of a child sorting through an experience that had been frightening and fast and confusing. "He said," she began, "that the people looking for us had people inside, that we weren't safe where we were." She paused. "He said the detective who called him was named Okafor." The name landed in the room like something physical. Marcus had gone completely still. Ethan looked at the text on his phone. Okafor's name. Okafor, who had initiated contact at the restaurant. Okafor, who had shown him the surveillance photograph and told him about the 6-week-old warrant. Okafor, who had driven to Price's house tonight and come back with a signed warrant in 8 minutes when the same request had been sitting untouched for 6 weeks. 8 minutes. He thought about that. He thought about the whiteboard in her office. Names connected by lines that had been erased and redrawn so many times the surface had gone gray. He thought about the way she'd said, "Don't do anything I can't explain to a judge," instead of "don't do anything." He thought about Rourke, who had sat quietly and written things down and not said much, and how that could mean 2 different things depending on which version of the situation was true. Outside, the first police unit arrived. He heard the engine, the doors, voices in the radio frequency he recognized from the conference room earlier. Marcus leaned close to him in the dark. "What do you want to do?" he said very quietly. Ethan looked at Lily. He looked at Tomas. He thought about the van going east. He thought about the plate Danny had sent to Rourke. He thought about the person who had used Okafor's name to move 2 people out of a secure location, and whether that person was Okafor herself or someone who had access to Okafor's name and the knowledge of what it would mean when spoken in the right room. He didn't know. That was the problem. He had 7 adults on the second floor and 2 children in this room, and police arriving outside, and a compromised operation of unknown depth and no way to determine in the next 90 seconds which people coming through that door were safe and which ones had a different agenda entirely. He looked at Marcus. "I need you to take the children out the window I came through," he said. "South face, first opening east of the modified door. Rex is at the base. Get them to Danny's truck, 3 blocks east on the service road. Do not take them to any official location until I tell you it's cleared." Marcus didn't hesitate. "And you?" "I'm going to open the front door," Ethan said, "and find out exactly what kind of situation we're all in." He looked at Lily one more time. She looked back at him with those eyes, dark and wet and old for 8 years old in a way that no child should be. And she did not ask him if everything was going to be fine, because she was, he had realized over the course of this evening, a person who already knew the difference between comfort and truth. "Rex will be there," he said. She nodded. He turned and walked toward the front of the building, toward the arriving police units and the lights beginning to move against the warehouse's high windows, toward whatever was waiting on the other side of a situation that had just become something he hadn't planned for and couldn't fully see. Behind him, in the dark, he heard Marcus lift Lily from the floor and Tomas follow without being asked. The front door was a roll-up loading bay. He found the manual release and pulled it. The door rose. The lights hit him full in the face, and through the glare he could see 3 figures moving forward. Okafor in the center, Rourke to her left, and to her right a man in a black jacket that Ethan had never seen before. The man in the black jacket was looking at the building behind Ethan, looking for something he expected to find there. And when his eyes came back to Ethan and found only Ethan, no children, no Lily, no Tomas, the expression that crossed his face in the fraction of a second before he controlled it was not surprise. It was calculation. Ethan Cross looked at that expression and understood, with the cold and total clarity that 17 years had built into the base of his operating system, that the night was nowhere near over. The man in the black jacket had a name. Ethan found that out in the next 30 seconds, when Okafor said it while introducing him with the specific, careful neutrality of someone who was performing normalcy under observation. "This is Agent Cord Brennan, Federal Task Force. He's been coordinating with us on the warrant." Brennan extended his hand. Ethan looked at it. He shook it, because not shaking it in that moment would have communicated something he wasn't ready to communicate yet. Brennan's grip was firm and practiced, and told him nothing except that the man had shaken many hands in professional contexts. He was mid-40s, wide through the shoulders, the black jacket over a charcoal shirt that had been pressed this morning and was now, at 2 in the morning, showing the specific wrinkling of a long day. His eyes were pale, gray or very light blue, hard to determine in the warehouse lights, and they moved over Ethan's face with the assessment speed of someone whose job was reading people. "Mr. Cross?" Brennan said. "Hell of a night." "Yes," Ethan said. "Detective Okafor tells me you've been instrumental." "I was in a restaurant." Brennan almost smiled. "Right place, right time." Something like that. Okafor had moved past them into the warehouse, Rourke at her shoulder, both of them doing what detectives did when they entered a scene, cataloging, moving through the space with their eyes ahead of their feet, noting everything. Additional officers were coming through behind them, and Ethan could hear the radio traffic picking up, the organized noise of a law enforcement operation shifting from approach to execution. He watched Brennan. Brennan was watching the building. Specifically, Brennan was watching the east end of the building, the hallway, the office door at the far end, the space where 2 children had been sitting on cots 90 seconds ago, and were now, if Marcus had moved at the pace Ethan expected him to move, no longer present. "How'd you get involved?" Ethan said. Brennan looked at him. "Task Force has had a flag on this network for a while. When the Harlow's arrest came through the system tonight, it tripped the flag. That was fast. We have good monitoring. At 11 at night." Brennan held his eyes. "Trafficking doesn't take nights off, Mr. Cross." It was a smooth answer. It was the answer of someone who was accustomed to smooth answers and had a ready supply of them and deployed them with the ease of long practice. Ethan filed that. He also filed the fact that Brennan had arrived simultaneously with the police units, which meant he'd either been with Okafor at Price's house or he'd known the units were moving and positioned himself to arrive with them. Neither of those options was comfortable. Okafor came back from the hallway. Her face had a quality Ethan had not seen on it before. A tightening around the eyes that was not quite confusion and not quite suspicion, something between them. The room at the end of the hall, she said. It's empty. I know, Ethan said. She looked at him. The children are safe, he said. They're not in the building. A silence. He watched Brennan's face. Nothing moved in it. Which was itself the tell. A normal person, a task force agent who'd arrived at a scene expecting to find child victims and was being told they'd been moved, would have produced some reaction. Even a controlled person would have shown the micro-expression of recalibration. Brennan produced nothing, and the nothing was too clean, too prepared. Where are they? Okafor said. Somewhere safe. Somewhere I know is safe. He met her eyes. Detective, somebody used your name tonight to remove Lily Vasquez and her mother from protective custody. I need to know if that came from inside this operation before I hand those children to anyone. Okafor went very still. Beside her, Rourke had stopped writing. Repeat that, Okafor said. Lily told me. Man with a badge, black jacket, told her and her mother that the people searching for them had people inside the department. Said Detective Okafor had authorized the move. He paused. She's 8 years old. She remembered the name because she'd met you. Okafor turned and looked at Brennan. Brennan's expression had not changed. I don't know anything about a transfer, Brennan said. No? Okafor's voice had changed register. It had dropped, and whatever warmth or professional courtesy had been in it before was not in it now. Because you were the one who told me we needed to move the witnesses tonight, for their protection. You made that call at 9:15. Brennan said nothing. I told you we didn't have the resources to move them until morning, Okafor continued. I told you they were secure where they were, and you said you'd handle the coordination. A pause. You said you'd handle it. The warehouse had gone quiet in the particular way spaces went quiet. When the people in them realized the conversation in the center of the room had shifted into different territory than anyone had prepared for. 2 uniformed officers near the loading dock had stopped moving. Rourke had taken a half-step sideways, small, probably unconscious, the body creating distance from something it had recognized before the mind caught up. Brennan looked at Ethan. You moved those children without authorization, he said. That's obstruction. I moved 2 children out of a building through a window, Ethan said, because a man I didn't recognize showed up in a black jacket using a detective's name and I didn't know whose side he was on. He held Brennan's eyes. I still don't. Another silence. Brennan reached into his jacket. Every person in the room registered the movement, and the room's temperature changed in the collective half-second of suspended reaction. And then Brennan produced a phone, just a phone, and held it up and looked at the screen with the studied calm of a man who was deciding something. I need to make a call, he said. You can make it here, Okafor said. It's a secure line. You can make it here, Agent Brennan. He looked at her. She looked at him. The look lasted 4 seconds, which was a long time for 2 professionals in a standoff, and then Brennan put the phone back in his pocket. All right, he said, and then to Ethan. You and I should talk. We're talking. Privately. We're talking here. Brennan exhaled through his nose, a minimal sound, the sound of a man accepting a condition he didn't prefer. He looked at Okafor. He looked at Rourke. He looked at the 2 uniforms near the loading dock who were very deliberately not looking at him. The network, he said, speaking to Ethan directly now as if the others weren't present, is larger than what's in this building, larger than what's in Okafor's files. The task force has been building an operation for 14 months, and tonight's arrests, he paused a fraction of a second, tonight's arrests happened outside the timeline of that operation. Meaning I jumped your play, Ethan said. Meaning you created a situation that may have compromised an operation that's bigger than one city and bigger than one network cell. The word may was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Ethan noticed it. He also noticed that Brennan still hadn't explained why Lily and her mother had been moved, or who had moved them, or how his name had ended up in the mouth of whoever had come to collect them. The children, Ethan said. Who moved them? I told you I don't. You told Okafor you'd handle the coordination for witness relocation. So whoever went to that safe location tonight had the information you were coordinating, which means either you sent them or someone with access to your coordination did. He took 1 step toward Brennan. Not aggressive, not performative, just closing the distance to the range where the other man would feel the conversation more directly. So I'll ask again, who moved them? Brennan's jaw moved. Slightly. A small internal adjustment. There's a component of the task force that operates outside standard documentation, he said, finally. For security. To prevent exactly the kind of inside access that you're describing. A black unit, Ethan said. An insulated component. And someone in that insulated component decided tonight was the night to pull two witnesses who were material to a case that just broke wide open. Ethan didn't blink. That's either a catastrophic coincidence or it isn't. Brennan said nothing. Okafor stepped forward. I want a name, she said. I want the name of whoever went to that location tonight. I want their credentials, and I want it in the next 5 minutes, or I am calling the FBI field office directly and explaining why a federal agent coordinating with my department apparently facilitated the removal of two protected witnesses from a secure location on the same night that witnesses connected to the same network were arrested at a restaurant. She said it without raising her voice, which made it considerably more effective than if she had. Are we clear? Brennan looked at her for a long moment. His name is Harker, he said. Vincent Harker. He's been embedded in the task force for 8 months. Okafor turned to Rourke without another word. Rourke was already on his phone. Ethan stepped back and took out his own phone and called Danny. Where are you? He said. 2 miles east. Truck stop off the interstate. Marcus is with the kids. Stay there. Don't move for any reason until I call you. He paused. If anyone else calls you, anyone, don't confirm your position. Understood. A beat. Ethan, the girl. She asked me if Rex was coming. Ethan looked at Rex, who was sitting 3 feet away watching Brennan with the calm, assessing stillness that the dog reserved for people he hadn't yet categorized. Tell her yes, he said. He ended the call. The next 4 hours were the kind that didn't resolve cleanly, because nothing that involved 17 adults and 2 children and a compromised task force component and a network that spanned multiple states resolved cleanly at 2 in the morning. The 7 people from the second floor were brought down and processed by EMTs who'd arrived with the second police wave, dehydrated, malnourished, a respiratory infection in 2 of them that would need antibiotics, the specific psychological state that crisis counselors had a clinical name for, and that Ethan simply recognized as the look of people who had been property for a period of time and were still processing the shift back to being people. He stayed until all 7 were in ambulances. Okafor worked the scene with the focused efficiency of someone who had, over the course of the last 3 hours, been given an excellent reason to be angry and had converted that anger entirely into competence. She documented, directed, and coordinated with a precision that Ethan watched with something close to respect. Rourke had run Harker's name and come back with a federal employee profile that was too clean, the specific over-cleanliness of a record that had been managed. And that information had gone up a chain that Okafor was clearly not entirely comfortable trusting, which was a reasonable response to the evening's developments. Brennan had been separated. Not arrested. There wasn't enough for that yet, and everyone in the room knew it. But separated, requested to remain on site for a formal interview, a request that was politely worded and that carried the weight of Okafor's expression behind it, which was not polite at all. At 4:17 in the morning, Ethan sat on the back bumper of a paramedic unit that had finished its work and was waiting for clearance to leave, and he drank a bottle of water that someone had handed him and he hadn't tasted. Rex sat beside him with his head against Ethan's knee, and Ethan's hand was on the dog's neck without Ethan having made a conscious decision to put it there. Okafor sat down beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Walsh ran Harker's credentials through the task force directory, she said. His onboarding documentation was filed 8 months ago, signed by a supervisor who retired 6 months ago and can't currently be reached. She looked at the ground. His access level included witness protection location data. So he had the safe house address. He had all of them. She picked up a piece of gravel and turned it over in her fingers. We're looking at every relocation we've done in the last 8 months. Ethan thought about that. 8 months. Every witness moved. Every safe house address that Harker's access level had touched. The van that left before your units arrived, he said. Danny tracked the plate? Rourke has it. State Patrol issued a bolo 40 minutes ago. She paused. We'll find it. You'll find the van, Ethan said. Whether there are people in it when you find it is a different question. She didn't argue with that. Lily, Okafor said. She identified Brennan's name, not Harker's. Harker used Brennan's name, or Lily was told it was Brennan's name, and it wasn't. He turned the water bottle over in his hands. Or Brennan knew and gave Harker the authorization and is now positioning himself as a victim of his own subordinate's actions, which is the version of this that's hardest to prove and easiest to maintain. Okafor was quiet. "Which version do you think is true?" she said. "I think Brennan knew something was wrong tonight and made the decision to come in anyway, because coming in was safer than not coming in. I think the 8-minute signature from Price was because Brennan made a call that moved the process along, and I think he did that because once this location was compromised, the faster the official operation moved, the more it looked like everything was coordinated and intentional." He looked at her. "I think he's good at this, and I think he's been doing it for longer than 8 months. She absorbed that. "I need you to put that in writing," she said. "No. Ethan. Not because I won't cooperate, because anything I put in writing goes into a system that Harker had access to, and I don't know yet who else had the same access, and until I know that, paper is a liability." He stood up. "What I'll do is sit down with the FBI field office supervisor directly, not task force, field office. And I'll do it with a specific agent I know personally who is not connected to this operation and who I can verify is not connected to it." He looked at her. "Can you get me that meeting?" She looked up at him. "When?" "This morning, 8 o'clock. Before Price's courthouse opens, before Brennan's lawyer gets there, before whatever calls Brennan has been composing in his head all night get made." She was quiet for 3 seconds. "I can get you the meeting," she said. "Good." He called Danny back and gave him the address of a diner 4 blocks from the FBI field office. Neutral, public, the kind of place that opened at 6 and served coffee that was bad enough, to be honest. He told Danny to bring the children there at 7:30. He told him to park in the rear lot and come in through the kitchen entrance, which he knew because he'd eaten at the diner 7 or 8 times in the 2 years he'd lived in the city, and the owner, a retired Marine named Costello, left the kitchen entrance unlocked until 8. He texted Mara, "I'm okay. Explain tomorrow." She replied in 40 seconds. "It's already tomorrow." He almost smiled again. The almost smile was becoming a habit. The debrief with the FBI field office supervisor, a compact, precise woman named Agent Diane Lau, who had the demeanor of someone who had heard most things and was prepared to hear the rest, lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. It took place in a conference room on the 4th floor with Okafor present, Rourke present, and a DOJ attorney who appeared to be genuinely unhappy about the hour and channeled that unhappiness into aggressive note-taking. Ethan walked through it in order. The restaurant, the napkin, the positioning, the backup, the arrests, the conference room afterward, Walsh's files, the warehouse, the modified door, the 7 adults, the 2 children, the look on Brennan's face when he found the room empty, Lily's account of Harker, the name Okafor. Lau listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at her notes for 10 seconds. "You entered the warehouse without a warrant," she said. "The door was open. You climbed through a 2nd-floor window. The window was unlocked." She looked at him over the top of her notepad. It was the look of a person deciding whether to spend time on a thing or move past it. She moved past it. "The language you heard at the restaurant, the dialect. You identified it in the field. I said I recognized it. Confirmation would require a linguist. But you've heard it before, in an operational context." "Yes." "Connected to what you believe is the same network." "Yes." "That intelligence is classified." "I'm aware." Lau set down her notepad. "Mr. Cross, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room until I say it does." She looked at Okafor briefly, then back to Ethan. "The network you encountered tonight has been under investigation by 3 agencies for approximately 22 months. The task force that Brennan is attached to was stood up as a coordinating body for that investigation 11 months ago." She paused. "We believe the network's operational security has been substantially better than it should be, given the resources we've put against it, for approximately the last 8 months. 8 months. The same number that kept appearing. "Harker's onboarding date," Ethan said. "Yes." "You think Harker's been feeding them?" "I think it's possible. I think it's also possible that Harker is a symptom rather than a source, that the compromise goes higher and Harker is the mechanism, not the origin." She folded her hands on the table. The two men who left in the first van from the warehouse tonight. They've been recovered. State Patrol found the van at a rest stop 40 miles east. Both men are in custody. A pause. The van was empty otherwise. Ethan processed that. They moved the other people before the van left, he said. The first van was a decoy, or the occupants were transferred somewhere along the route before State Patrol was in position. That's our current assessment. Which means someone in your channel told them the bolo was coming. The room was quiet. Lau's expression was the specific expression of a person confirming something they had already concluded and did not enjoy. We have a significant problem, she said. And you, Mr. Cross. She looked at him with the direct assessing quality she'd maintained throughout the 2 hours and 40 minutes, are currently the most useful person I have access to who is not inside the contaminated chain. Ethan looked at his hands. He thought about 2 years. He thought about the morning runs and the security consulting and the house in Kensington and the VA counselor who'd said transition process in a tone that suggested he believed such processes were achievable. What are you asking me to do? He said. I'm asking you to help us identify the depth of the compromise. Not officially. You're a civilian, and that has both limitations and advantages that I want to preserve. But with full access to what we have, full communication with me directly, and whatever resources you can bring that exist outside our current structure. Danny Reese and Marcus Webb, Ethan said. If you trust them. I do. Then yes. Lau picked up her notepad. And your dog. Ethan looked up. I've read the incident report from the restaurant, she said. The dog moved before the attacker completed his reach. That's not trained response time. That's something else. She said it without sentimentality, as a piece of tactical assessment. That kind of asset is useful. Rex was sitting near the conference room door, chin up, watching the room with the steady professional attention that he brought to every space he occupied. Ethan Cross looked at the dog. Rex looked at him. All right, Ethan said. The meeting ended at 11:14 in the morning. Okafor walked out with Ethan into the hallway, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the hallway had the specific quality of spaces that had seen long conversations end, a kind of residual pressure in the air. Brennan's attorney arrived at 9:50, she said. Expected. He's saying Harker acted independently, that he delegated logistics and Harker exceeded his authority. Also expected. It might even be partially true. It's the version that keeps Brennan viable, Ethan said, which is the version Brennan will maintain regardless of what's true. Okafor stopped walking. She turned and faced him in the hallway with the afternoon light from the window at the end of the corridor making the shadows on her face angular and sharp. What I said last night, she said. Don't do anything I can't explain to a judge. I remember. I meant it as a limitation. I understand now that you heard it as a condition with a specific boundary and that you operated within the letter of that boundary while doing things I almost certainly couldn't explain to any judge I've ever met. She held his eyes. I want to be clear that I'm not saying that what you did was wrong. Given what we found in that building, given those children, she stopped. A small pause, controlled. I'm saying that if you're going to do this, if you're going to work with Lau, I need to understand where your lines are. Because the next time things move fast, I need to know what you'll do. Ethan thought about it, genuinely thought about it, which took several seconds. I won't endanger civilians, he said. I won't act on compromised information without flagging it. I won't put assets in positions that create liability for you or for Lau. He paused. And I won't wait when there are children involved. That one I can't negotiate. Okafor looked at him for a moment. That's fair, she said. She started walking again. Lily and her mother had been processed through a different channel, one that Lau had set up independently, bypassing the standard system entirely, using a safe location that existed in no documentation Harker had ever touched. Ethan knew this because Lau had told him, and he believed it because Lau was the kind of person whose reliability you assessed not through their assurances, but through the structure of their reasoning, and her reasoning was clean. He went to see them at 2 in the afternoon. The location was a residence, not institutional, not a facility, just a house in a quiet neighborhood. The kind that had a front porch and a neighbor who kept a garden, and where a woman and a small girl arriving with a social worker would not register as anything unusual. Claire Vasquez was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when Ethan came in, and she looked up at him with the expression of a woman who had passed through something that had restructured the scale by which she measured things. "Thank you," she said. She said it the way people said things they'd been thinking about for a specific number of hours and had decided were insufficient, but said anyway, because there wasn't a better option. "You don't have to—" "I know I don't," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true." Lily was on the floor in the adjacent room with Rex, who was lying on his side with the patient, slightly theatrical submission of a dog who had made peace with being used as furniture by small people. She was talking to him in the low, even voice that children used when they talked to animals, the one that didn't require the animal to respond, and wasn't really asking for response, just finding the comfort of speaking to something that listened without conditions. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. Lily looked up. "He likes having his ears scratched," she said, as if this were information Ethan might not have. "I know. He's been letting me do it for a long time." "About 20 minutes, Ethan said. "That's a long time," Lily said seriously. He leaned against the doorframe. Rex's tail moved once, slow, rhythmic, the tail movement of a dog who was comfortable and occupied and not asking for anything. "Lily," he said, "the man who came to move you last night, did he say anything else? Anything besides your mother's name and Detective Okafor's name? Did he say where you were going?" She thought about it with the careful, literal attention that 8-year-olds brought to questions when they understood the questions were serious. "He said we were going somewhere the network couldn't reach," she said. "He said that 3 times, like he wanted us to remember it." "The network couldn't reach," Ethan repeated. "Yes." She went back to Rex's ears. "I didn't believe him, because he was scared." Ethan looked at her. "What do you mean?" "His hands were shaking," she said. "My mom's hands shake when she's scared. His were doing the same thing." She said it with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who had spent enough time reading adults in difficult situations to have become accurate at it. "He wasn't trying to hurt us, but he was scared of someone." Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Harker. Vincent Harker. A man with shaking hands moving 2 witnesses through a building at night, saying the same phrase 3 times. Somewhere the network couldn't reach, like he was trying to convince himself as much as them. Not a predator, a messenger, or a man caught between something above him and something he hadn't fully agreed to. Ethan pulled out his phone and called Lau. She answered on the first ring. "Harker," he said, "I need to talk to him before his attorney gets the situation locked down. And I need it to be informal, not a deposition, not a recorded interview, just a conversation." A pause. "Why?" Lau said. "Because I think he might be willing to talk to someone who isn't inside the structure he's afraid of. And because a man with shaking hands moving witnesses at midnight isn't someone who made a comfortable choice. He's someone who was put in a position and made the best call he could see." Another pause. "That's a generous read," Lau said. "It might be wrong, but if it's right, he's the inside access we need to find out how deep this goes." He watched Rex shift slightly under Lily's hand, settling deeper into the floor. "Set up the conversation, somewhere that isn't federal property, somewhere that his attorney doesn't know about yet. That has legal implications. Everything about this has legal implications. I'm asking you to make the call." A silence of 4 seconds. "I'll call you in an hour," Lau said. He put the phone back in his pocket. From the kitchen, Claire Vasquez was still sitting at the table. He could see her profile through the doorway, the set of her shoulders, the slight loosening that happened when a person began to believe that the immediate danger had passed, the body releasing something the mind hadn't yet fully authorized it to release. On the floor, Lily was telling Rex something in a very low voice. Ethan couldn't make out the words. Rex's ear moved, one, then the other, tracking her voice. Ethan Cross stood between the 2 rooms and thought about Brennan's attorney and Harker's shaking hands, and a van that had been found empty, and another van moving east that Danny had lost near a highway interchange. And he thought about a network that had been operating for 22 months under the surveillance of 3 agencies without significantly degrading. And he thought about what that meant about the depth of the thing he had agreed an hour ago in a federal conference room to put himself inside. He thought about the napkin. He thought about the H, larger than the other letters, drawn first with the force of urgency. Then Lily looked up from the floor and said, What's Rex's middle name? Ethan blinked. He doesn't have one. She considered that. He should have one. Something serious. She went back to the dog's ears. I'll think about it. Ethan looked at her. He thought about what Okafor had said in the hallway. Where are your lines? And his answer, and the part of the answer he hadn't been entirely certain of when he said it, but was more certain of now, standing in a borrowed house in the middle of an afternoon that had come out of a night he hadn't planned for. He wasn't going to wait. Not when there were children. Not when there were people in vans going east. Not when the network that had put them there was still operating because the system meant to stop it had been breathing its air for 8 months. He was going to move faster than that. He just needed to know where to start. His phone buzzed. Lau. Harker will meet. He asked one condition, that the dog not be in the room. Ethan looked at Rex. Rex looked at him with the calm, dark-eyed attention of a dog who had no opinion about conditions and would honor whatever was decided. Ethan typed back. Tell him the dog stays outside the room. That's the best I can do. Lau. He accepted. Tonight. 8 p.m. I'll send the address. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Lily once more. This child who had written help on a napkin and pushed it across a restaurant floor because she'd looked up and seen a man with a dog and made a calculation about what he was capable of. She'd been right about that calculation. He intended to stay right about it. Outside, through the window of the borrowed house, the afternoon was moving toward evening, and somewhere in the city a man named Vincent Harker was sitting with something he knew that he hadn't yet decided to say. And the distance between those two conditions was what the next several hours would be made of. Ethan Cross picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd set it 6 hours ago, and he put it on, and Rex stood up from the floor with the fluid economy of a dog who always knew when they were leaving. You're going, Lily said. For a while. She looked at Rex. Will you bring him back? Yes. She nodded once, the same nod she'd given him in the warehouse when he'd told her Rex would be there. The nod of a person who had made a decision about whether to believe something and arrived at yes. He walked out into the afternoon. Vincent Harker was already at the table when Ethan arrived. The location Lau had chosen was a bar that had closed 18 months ago. She had access to the property through a federal asset forfeiture case that hadn't fully processed, which meant the building existed in a legal limbo, where its ownership was unclear and its occupancy was not monitored. The power still ran. The bar still had bottles on the shelves, most of them empty. Someone had left a jacket on a stool, and it was still there, which gave the place the specific atmosphere of a space that had been interrupted rather than concluded. Harker was sitting at the bar with his hands flat on the surface in front of him, not because he'd been told to put them there, but because it was the posture of a man who wanted to be visible, who wanted to communicate the absence of threat in the only language left to him. He was younger than Ethan had expected, 38, maybe 40, with the kind of face that had probably read as trustworthy in every room he'd ever used it in. He had the build of a man who ran, who took care of himself out of discipline rather than vanity. He looked tired in the specific way that people looked tired when they hadn't slept, because sleeping would have required turning off the thing that was running in the background of everything. Rex stayed outside with Danny. Ethan sat on the stool 2 down from Harker and didn't say anything immediately. He looked at the bottles on the shelf. He looked at the jacket on the stool. He looked at Harker's hands flat on the bar. You wanted to move them somewhere safe, Ethan said. Not a question. Harker looked at him. Yes. Not because Brennan told you to? A pause. Brennan didn't tell me to. Brennan told me the location was secure and to leave it alone. He looked at his hands. I didn't believe him. Why not? Because 2 weeks ago I ran a search on one of the network's known aliases, and the search triggered a flag in a system that I didn't put a flag in. Which means someone else had already flagged that alias, and when I searched it, they knew I was looking. He paused. That kind of flag takes either administrative access or task force supervisor clearance. Brennan has both. Yes. Ethan looked at him steadily. So you decided to move 2 witnesses in the middle of the night using a dead detective's name without telling anyone. Harker flinched. Small, controlled, but there. I used Okafor's name because I thought it would make them trust me. I wasn't trying to implicate her. It did implicate her, for about 4 hours. I know, he exhaled. I know that. I'm sorry. The apology landed with the weight of something that had been sitting on him since the previous night. Not performed, not strategic, just a man saying the thing that was true. The network knew your units were coming tonight, Ethan said. The van that left before Okafor's units arrived. Someone tipped them. Brennan, Harker said. It came out flat. Not a guess. You're certain? I'm certain he had the information and the motive. I'm not certain of the mechanism. I've been trying to get the mechanism for 6 weeks, and I can't get it without access to his communications, and I can't get that access without going through channels that he controls. He looked up. That's why I moved the witnesses, because I thought if they disappeared from the official system, whoever was feeding the network would lose track of them, and the network would stop having a reason to clean up loose ends. Ethan processed that. It was not a perfect plan. It was in fact a plan with significant problems, executed by a man who was operating alone inside a compromised structure without the ability to trust any of the normal verification mechanisms. It was the plan of someone who had done the right calculation about the problem and the wrong calculation about his own capacity to solve it unilaterally. Ethan recognized that particular error. He'd made versions of it himself. Your attorney, he said. Does she know any of this? No. Tell her tonight, all of it. He stood up. Lau is going to want a formal statement. You're going to give it to her directly, not through the task force chain directly. She'll tell you when and where. He looked at Harker. You moved those witnesses because you thought they were in danger. That's not nothing. But the way you did it created a situation where no one knew where they were, and if I hadn't found them first, that warehouse would have been their last known location. Harker looked at the bar surface. I know, he said. So when Lau asks you that question, and she will ask it, give her the straight answer, not the answer that manages the situation, the one that's true. Harker nodded once. Ethan walked out. Rex was at the door sitting beside Danny, and when Ethan came through, he fell into step without being asked. Danny read Ethan's face the way he'd been reading it for 8 years. The slight forward set of the jaw, the quality of stillness in the eyes, and said nothing. They walked to the truck. They drove. After several blocks, Danny said, He's going to cooperate. Yes. Is that enough? It's the start of enough, Ethan said. The rest depends on what Lau does with it. Danny drove. You sleeping tonight? He said. Ethan looked out the window. The city moved past, ordinary and lit, people doing ordinary things in the ordinary dark. A couple arguing in front of a restaurant. A man walking a dog. A delivery truck idling at a light. Probably not, he said. Danny nodded. Yeah, he said. Me neither. What followed was not cinematic. It was paperwork and waiting rooms and conference calls and the particular institutional grind of a federal investigation shifting from one phase to another. It was 12 days of Lau and her team working through documentation that Harker provided, cross-referencing it against 8 months of task force records, finding the threads that Brennan had pulled and the ones he'd left in place to make the pulling invisible. Brennan resigned on the 9th day. Not arrested, not yet. But his attorney negotiated a separation from the task force with the specific language that kept certain things in motion. Lau told Ethan this on the phone with the tone of someone who understood that the accounting was incomplete and was committed to completing it regardless of how long it took. He'll face charges, she said. It won't be fast. I know how this works, Ethan said. The network's eastern cell was disrupted. 11 additional arrests in 3 states over the last week. 2 of the people from the warehouse have been connected to cases in Georgia and Ohio that had gone cold. A pause. The van that went east, we found the people who were in it. They were being held at a secondary location that Harker's information identified. Everyone's out. Ethan sat with that for a moment. Everyone's out. It was not a complete sentence in the sense of the larger problem, because the larger problem was the kind that didn't resolve in 12 days or 12 months. That had roots in systems and economics and human ugliness that no single operation could address. He knew that. He'd known it walking into the restaurant on the night of Mara's birthday, and he knew it now. But everyone from the van was out. Okay, he said. There's something else, Lau said. The classified intelligence you referenced. The dialect. The network identification from your operational briefing in 2019. I had it pulled and declassified under emergency review. It corroborates the connection you identified. The network you encountered in this city is a domestic branch of the same organization. She paused. That means the scope of what we're looking at is significantly larger than one city. I know. I'd like you to stay involved. Ethan looked at Rex, who was lying on the floor of the kitchen in the house in Kensington, chin on his paws, watching Ethan with the patient attention of an animal who did not know the content of the conversation but knew the weight of it. I'll stay involved, Ethan said. He ended the call and sat at the kitchen table for a while without doing anything in particular. The house was quiet. It had always been quiet. That had been the thing about it, the quietness, the absence of the operational tempo he'd lived inside for 17 years. He'd thought of the quietness as something to adjust to, a condition of the new life he was assembling. He understood now that what he'd been doing for 2 years was not adjusting but waiting, without knowing what he was waiting for. He knew what he'd been waiting for now. He picked up his phone and called Mara. She answered on the third ring with the slightly elevated alertness of someone who'd been waiting for a call and was pretending not to have been. You survived, she said. So far. Are you going to tell me what happened? Actually tell me? Not the version where you leave out the parts that would concern me? I'll tell you most of it. Over dinner. He paused. You choose the restaurant. A beat. Not Harlow's, she said. Agreed. He could hear her exhale. Not quite a laugh, not quite relief. Something between. Dad. Yeah. I'm glad you were there. That night. Another pause. I know you think you were just at the wrong birthday dinner, but I'm glad you were there. Ethan Cross sat in his quiet kitchen and looked at his dog and thought about a crumpled napkin rolling across a polished floor. Me too, he said. 3 weeks after the warehouse, on a Thursday afternoon in October when the light was going amber and the trees on the street outside were doing what trees did in October in this part of the country, Ethan drove to the address that Claire Vasquez had given him when she'd moved into the new apartment. It was a second-floor unit in a building with an elevator, which mattered because of the leg brace, and it had a window that faced east, which Lily had told him specifically when she'd called to give him the address. It faces east. Rex can see the sunrise from the window, as though this were the most important piece of information to convey about the new home. Claire opened the door. She looked different than she had at the table in the borrowed house. Not recovered. That word was too simple and too fast, but re-inhabited. The dark circles were still there, but the hands weren't shaking. She'd cut her hair slightly shorter. She was wearing an expression that had some guarded warmth in it, the warmth of a person who hadn't stopped being careful, but had started allowing herself to feel things in addition to the carefulness. She's been asking when you were coming, Claire said. I should have come sooner. You've been busy. She stepped back to let him in. She understands busy. The apartment was small and not yet fully unpacked. Boxes in the corner of the living room, a bookshelf with things placed on it in the provisional way of someone who hadn't decided yet if this was the right place for them. A drawing on the wall near the window, taped up unevenly, the corners not quite flush. Even from across the room, Ethan could see the colors, blue and brown, and a large golden shape that was clearly meant to be a dog. Rex moved toward the drawing and sniffed the bottom edge of it carefully, and then sat back and looked at it with the thoughtful assessment of an animal encountering his own likeness for the first time. Lily came out of the hallway in the leg brace, moving with the specific, careful confidence of someone who had been doing her physical therapy and knew it, who had learned the particular rhythm of her own body and was no longer fighting it. She stopped when she saw Rex, and her face did the thing it had almost done in the restaurant and almost done in the warehouse, and did now completely and without reservation. It opened, the full, uncomplicated joy of a child seeing something she'd been looking forward to. Rex crossed the room to her in 4 steps and sat at her feet. She got down on the floor with him, brace and all, and put both arms around him and pressed her face into his neck. Ethan sat on the couch. Claire sat across from him with her coffee, and they didn't say much for a few minutes because some moments were better served by the absence of words, and this was one of them. Then Lily looked up from the floor. I thought of one, she said. Ethan looked at her. One what? Rex's middle name. She said it with the absolute certainty of someone who had been thinking about this for 3 weeks and was confident in the conclusion. It should be Atlas. Atlas, Ethan repeated. Because Atlas held everything up, she said, and Rex does that too. Ethan looked at Rex. Rex looked at Lily. Rex Atlas, Ethan said. I'll think about it. You should just say yes, Lily said. It's a good name. It is a good name. So say yes. Ethan almost smiled. Not the almost smile this time, but something that made it further along the journey. Yes, he said. Lily nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose position had been correctly adopted by the relevant authority and went back to the dog. Claire was watching him over her coffee cup. She had the look of a woman who had something to say and was deciding whether to say it, and then she said it. Lily's therapist says she's doing well, better than expected. She paused. She doesn't have nightmares about the warehouse. She has nightmares about before, about the weeks when we didn't have a way out. But not about the warehouse. She looked at her cup. Her therapist asked her why, and she said it was because the warehouse was where she found out someone came. Ethan was quiet. I don't know how to say what I want to say, Claire said. Thank you doesn't... I've said it. I know it doesn't cover it, but I also don't want you to think that we're... She stopped. We're not waiting for you. We're not building our whole recovery around someone coming to save us again. We're building our own thing. She looked up. But you are part of what made it possible to start building, and I wanted you to know that. Ethan looked at her. You raised a daughter who wrote help on a napkin and pushed it across a room full of strangers, he said. And when a man she didn't know walked toward her table, she grabbed the man's wrist and held on. He paused. You made that. Whatever was built before any of this, you made that. Claire looked at him for a moment. She looked away. She set down her coffee. From the floor, Lily said without looking up, Mom's going to cry. I am not, Claire said. You are. I'm not crying. Your voice does the thing. Claire made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite the other thing, and pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. And Ethan looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way people did when they wanted to give someone the dignity of feeling something without an audience. Outside the east-facing window, the October light was doing what October light did, going warm and long and final before the cold came in, the specific beauty of something about to change. Rex shifted on the floor, settling deeper, and Lily adjusted her position to accommodate him without stopping what she was saying to him, her voice still at that low, even frequency that wasn't asking for response and didn't need it. 6 weeks after that, Darren Walsh sent Ethan a file. It was the corporate chain he'd been tracing, the Delaware Shell, the Nevada Holding Company, the Cayman entity, and Walsh's contact at the insurance group had found the 4th level that the legal request had been unable to reach. The Cayman entity linked to a private equity structure with domestic investments in 7 states. 2 of those investments were logistics companies. One of the logistics companies operated a fleet of cargo vans. Ethan looked at the file for a long time. He forwarded it to Lau with a single line. This is where the money is. Lau called him back in 20 minutes. Where did you get this? She said. Asset tracing. Civilian source. Fully legal. The chain is documented. A pause. This is the financial backbone, she said. If this holds up, we can go after the infrastructure instead of just the operational cells. It holds up. Walsh built the first 3 levels. It's solid. Another pause, longer. He could hear her turning pages. Actual pages, which meant she'd printed it, which meant she was treating it as a serious document rather than a preliminary. This changes the scope of the operation significantly, she said. I know. Which means the timeline changes. The resources required change. A pause. And the risk level changes. I know that too. You're still in? Ethan Cross was sitting at the kitchen table in the house in Kensington. Rex was under the table with his chin on Ethan's foot. Through the window, the November morning was gray and cold, and the street was empty except for a woman walking a dog in a red jacket. He thought about the napkin. He thought about the H. He thought about Lily on the floor of an apartment saying Rex Atlas with total confidence in a decision she'd made 3 weeks ago and was simply waiting for him to catch up to. He thought about 17 years and 2 years and the distance between them and what it meant that the 2 years had felt longer than the 17 and what it meant that the last 3 weeks had not felt long at all. I'm in, he said. He ended the call. He looked at Rex. Rex looked at him, calm, present, entirely without drama about the direction things were going, because Rex had never made a distinction between the life they'd had before and the life they had now. Rex had simply shown up for each thing as it came. It was, Ethan had come to understand over 9 years, the dog's single most useful quality. He reached under the table and put his hand on Rex's head. Rex's tail moved, once, slow and certain. Ethan Cross picked up his notebook, paper, no battery required, and wrote 2 words at the top of a fresh page. Find them. Then he turned to the first line below it and began to write down everything he knew. 1. Months later, the federal investigation that grew from that night produced 53 arrests across 4 states, the dismantling of the logistics infrastructure that had moved people across state lines for 6 years, and a financial prosecution that reached into the private equity structure Walsh's tracing had uncovered. It was not the end of the problem. It was never the end of the problem. But it was a reckoning of a size that mattered, and it came from a chain of events that started with a crumpled piece of paper and a dog who noticed something the room had missed. Cord Brennan faced federal charges 14 months after the night at the warehouse. The case moved slowly, the way those cases did, but it moved. Harker testified. Walsh's documentation held up in discovery. Lau built the case with the methodical patience of someone who understood that the only thing that outlasted a well-constructed lie was a better-constructed truth. Ethan's name appeared nowhere in the public record of the investigation. That was intentional, and it suited him. The work was not about his name being anywhere. He did not return to DevGru. He did not take a federal position. He stayed a civilian with a dog and a notebook and a phone that Lau had programmed with a direct line to her office. And he used all 3 of those things with the focused purpose of a man who had found, somewhere between a restaurant on a Friday night and a borrowed house on a Tuesday afternoon, the answer to a question he hadn't known he'd been asking. Mara came to dinner on a Sunday in December, and they ate at a place with a breadbasket and no particular significance. And she asked him how it was going, and he told her most of it, and she listened the way she always listened, with the patient, slightly exasperated attention of someone who had grown up trying to understand a person who didn't narrate himself well. "Are you okay?" she said. Not the social version of the question, the real one. "Yes," he said. She looked at him carefully, the way she'd been looking at him carefully for years, reading the specific frequency that was his version of the truth. "You seem different," she said. "Yeah. Better different or different?" He thought about it honestly, which took a moment. "Just different," he said. "Like something got turned back on." She was quiet. She picked up her bread. She ate it. "Okay," she said finally. "Good." And under the table, Rex lay with his chin on Ethan's shoe, breathing slowly, going nowhere. 2 months after that, a package arrived at Ethan's house with no return address. Inside was a child's drawing, folded in quarters. He opened it on the kitchen table. A man with broad shoulders and a dog with gold-brown fur stood beside a girl in a wheelchair, all 3 of them drawn in crayon with the specific visual logic of a child who saw the world clearly and rendered it accordingly. The sun was in the corner. The girl was smiling with her whole face. Above them, in purple crayon, in letters that were steadier than the last time, Rex, Atlas, and Ethan. Below it, in smaller letters, clearly added as an afterthought because it was important. He came back. Ethan Cross stood at his kitchen table for a long moment. Then he opened the drawer beside the stove and took out a crumpled napkin, the one he'd kept, unfolded and then folded again, the purple letters still visible. Help. And he set the drawing beside it, and he stood there looking at both of them. 2 pieces of paper. One asked. One answered. He folded neither of them away. The strongest among us are not the ones who never break. They are the ones who, in the moment when it mattered most, turned towards someone who needed them and did not look away.